Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois. And welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on. They'll appear here in my chat room and we can talk directly. And I hope you're having a wonderful day, a wonderful week. And my subject for today is the psychic arts, and to a lesser extent, psychic reading. And I'm not entirely sure what all I'm going to say about this, um, because it's such a wide field to discuss. Um, my original thought was I was going to talk a bit about the particular nature of doing psychic readings where you're using the psychic arts to work with other people, but I think I want to start first with discussion of the psychic arts themselves. And of course, there are so many things that come under the heading of the psychic arts. But basically, the psychic arts are those things that use our psychic abilities, the higher powers of our soul, if you want to put it that way, which I normally would. And um, very often, we're talking about means of divination or means of spiritual communication. Divination are things like tarot decks, oracle cards, palmistry, astrology, numerology, endless ways of doing psychic reading or divination. Spirit messaging, of course, is oracular work, bringing through messages from spirit. And these are both different things and the same thing at the same time. And this is like so many things I talk about spiritually. It depends on exactly how you're looking at it. But they both are a matter of receiving information from spirit, and in that sense, they're just the same. One uses a tool, one does not. Um, one is more likely to be focused around um, what the recipient is looking for or what they need in their immediate life. The other may be quite general, maybe for the entire world and not for any one recipient. But it's still a matter of receiving information from spirit through whichever means you're using. And I've spoken before about how to do this sort of work and to do it well, you have to be able to take a very passive stand. Um, Everyone always thinks it's very complicated, very difficult to open this ability, to start doing this work. It's actually one of the simplest things imaginable, except no one can ever quite seem to explain that until you experience it. At least that was my experience. If you watch little children, they often have this very naturally. But by the time they grow up, it often has closed itself off. To some extent, if we could stop it from closing as we get older, we would not have to work to develop it. But as it is, we usually do, and we usually way overthink it. When I was learning how to do spirit messaging, I was told again and again, this is the simplest thing in the world, just let it happen. But I didn't know how to do that. And hello to Janet in the chat room. It's good to see you, Janet. When I finally did, and started doing spirit messaging, I suddenly understood what they meant by this is so simple, you can just let it happen. And it made perfect sense. But until I'd experienced it, I couldn't really comprehend it. So I kind of feel like that's probably true for most people. And because the society we live in, tends to downplay these abilities or even dismiss the idea of these abilities, I think we tend to overcomplicate it for ourselves. It's really a very natural thing. It's as natural as breathing, really, and everybody does it unconsciously. And everyone has had, I think, um, psychic experiences that they may brush off in other ways as coincidence, as intuition, um, as a hunch that proved right, but was actually exactly the same thing we're talking about in psychic work, except not so intentional. When we learn to do it intentionally, we're just taking command of what is really a very natural process. And the more we can accept it as a natural process, the easier it's going to go. The more that we think of it as being supernatural, the more we think of it as being boogie boogie, for one of a better way to put it, the harder we're going to make it for ourselves. And I don't know, like I said, I don't really know how to explain that to people because until you've done it, it's difficult to conceptualize. I had a similar experience with meditation. I always thought that the idea of meditation was that you must still your mind and not think about anything. And then at a certain point, someone said to me, well, you can't do that. Your mind will always be moving. What you do is you don't focus on it. If something comes into your mind, you let it go right across, like a cloud going across the sky. You notice it, but you do not react to it. You respond passively. And presently, you'll find the things coming into your mind aren't actually coming from your mind. But it's hard to explain this until you've started to do it, because it's not how we normally think about things. It isn't necessarily that it isn't how we normally do things, but it's not how we think of them. And, I found for most of the psychic arts as I learned them, and many metaphysical things, that when I found I finally was understanding them, my reaction was kind of, oh, well, I kind of already knew that. Um, or, oh, this is what I would have thought. But of course it wasn't, because I wasn't thinking that way. I had the good fortune to learn these things very, very early in life. Um, Maybe that made it a little bit earlier or a little bit easier. I don't know. Um, and of course, I'm still learning now. We never stop learning. And regarding the psychic arts and also magical practice, the best advice I ever received came from my teacher, Lady Crystal, on the occasion of my third degree initiation. And that was to remember that this is not an ending, but a beginning of the journey, that you will always continue to grow and learn. You have simply fulfilled the qualifications for this degree at this time. You have not remotely completed your journey. And I find that even now, um, in my 60s, to still be true. And probably the best advice that I could pass on to anyone as well. Now, talking about reading for other people, when it comes to the psychic arts, I find that people very often enter the psychic arts for the same reason that many people enter the psychiatric arts, as part of their personal journey, uh, and part of their way of dealing with their own issues. There are other people who do it out of pure intellectual curiosity, um, and some who do it out of a desire for service. But I think for most people, it begins with themselves, and and then most commonly it expands. Pardon my nose, it's still winter. When you're reading for other people, it's very different than when you're reading for yourself. Um, but those differences are mostly in your mind. The process is the same, the technique is the same, but how you think about it may be very different, because likely your ego is going to be involved. You'll be worried about whether you're hitting, or whether they're pleased with what they're getting, or whether um, they're making judgments, or all sorts of different things that people put in to this process that don't really belong there at all. Ideally, when you're reading for another person, you do it just as you would for yourself, and you are that passive slate for spirit to communicate through. Um, I've often talked about when you do a reading, you don't interpret it, you don't analyze it, you just bring it through. And then afterwards, you can go back and do those things. And this is just as true with other people. I would love to be able to say that I always pursued it that way. But there are certainly times when there were things that would come through and I would say, oh, I can't say that to this person. Um, things that seemed very unlikely or very unpleasant. And there was a time that I would censor that. Over time, I learned that was not the right thing to do. And what I found is that even though it might seem like this isn't something you can just say to the person, very often they already knew it. Very often they know exactly what you're talking about and will agree with it. And hello to Diana in the chat room. And Diana asks if she can get a reading. I don't normally do readings on this program, but we do have Tarot Thursday here on Pagan World TV. That will be tonight. And that is all about doing readings for people. So if you want to get a reading, please tune in to Tarot Thursday and you can get some wonderful readings. Um, and but you know, since you mention it, my cards are right here. It would be, it's either 8, it's either 9 or 10 Eastern time. Let me just take a moment and check for you. I do this program frequently, so you would think I would remember the time, but I will know in just a second. I believe I'm going to say it's 9 p.m. Central and 10 Eastern. But if you watch for announcements on our pages, you'll see. But I do have my tarot cards here. This particular deck is the Hoi Polloi deck. It was the very first deck I ever had. It was a gift from my mother. And my mother was the first person I ever did a reading for because she was my first teacher on the subject. And so what I will do is I'll draw 3 cards for you, Diana. And we will do a little bit of a general reading. But again, Tarot Thursday is the better place to go for a reading. And the 3 cards I have drawn, four cards I have drawn. One of them came out as 2. I have the 10 of Cups, the 4 of Swords, the 6 of Coins, and the Devil. And I would say we're talking about the next 2 to 3 months. And the first thing is happy family, happy home, happy foundation. So I think that whatever you're doing in this time period, you have a good solid foundation under you. That overall should make it a good, pleasant time. You're waiting for certain things to happen. You're probably anxious for them to happen. They're not going to happen quickly. They have to have however much time they need to take their shape. So be patient, let them take the form they're going to take, and you can expect help from another person in moving them forward. That person could be a financial helper, could be a work helper, could even just be emotional support, but another person will be helping. And finally, we have the Devil. And the way that I take the Devil is concern over things you don't really need to be concerned about. Worry that you really could just not bother with. And so what I would say is that as that situation is taking shape, you may find yourself being worried about it, but you don't need to be. So try not to be, although that's always easier to say than to do. But any worry that you're experiencing about it is unnecessary, understandable, but unnecessary. And just keep your faith and keep pushing forward, and you'll find things will work out. So that's a little mini reading for you. But again, I would recommend you to Tarot Thursday. Tonight it's Reverend Mary Hawk and Reverend Brian Ellicott, I believe. And they do wonderful readings. And that kind of reading I just did, I've talked about that before. We usually call that a mini reading. And when I first started reading, oh, and hello to Hello to Annie in the chat room. How do I find you? Do you mean how to find Tarot Thursday? Whatever page you're watching this on, it will, well, actually, just it should be at, I would think, Pagan World TV, among a number of other pages we follow. Chances are, if you're seeing this, it will be on the same page. And you can also go to paganworld.co. Um, and Annie asks, which country do you live in? And hello to Suzanne in the chat room. And I live in the USA, in Illinois, where we currently are deep in winter. And but the kind of reading I was doing when I first started reading tarot cards, I did what everybody does. I did spreads with lots of cards in sometimes complicated situations. Um, Usually the Celtic Cross, it is the most popular style of spread. And that is certainly what I learned as my first spread with the deck I was just using. Um, oh, and Suzanne is coming from Egypt. Thank you for letting us know, Suzanne. I find that lovely. Um, I love the fact that we get people from so many interesting places watching this program. And you know, like most tarot readers, I learned lots of spreads for lots of occasions. But as I started working psychic fairs, they insisted that we do lectures for the crowd at least once a day, and it was not at that time my strong suit. Now that sounds probably odd when I'm sitting here doing basically a lecture every day, but this was 40 some years ago, and I was much less accustomed to this sort of thing, and I found that a lot of readers did these mini readings, and I decided that's what I would do for my lecture. And the idea was to encourage people to get a reading, get them a little taste of reading. But what I found, so the mini reading was just as effective in answering the people's questions, finding what they needed to know, as the complex spreads. And so that's how I started doing readings in general. When I do a tarot reading, I usually will start by drawing 3 cards, and then 3 more, and then 3 more, however many it takes. And move forward from there. And I find that that's been just as effective for me as any of the different spreads that I once used. And that is an example of how this is an individual art form. How is going to be best for you to read is not really something another person can tell you, because what worked for them may not be what's best for you. And a good teacher will give you a lot of different possibilities that you can try and find what works best for you. That has always been my attitude toward the psychic arts, and also my attitude toward magic. So if you've taken, for example, my first degree lessons that I wrote 30 years ago, and have rewritten several times since, one of the things you'll notice is that it talks about all the different ways that things can be done. Or at least many different ways, and make sure to let people know there are different ways. And I think this is vitally important, whether we're talking about magic or psychism, which in the end are 2 different arms of the same thing. Magic is an active practice, psychism is a passive practice, but they're both a matter of bringing through the higher powers of the soul. And in both cases, we're all individual, and how we do it is very individual. And this is a hard thing for some people to understand, because, you know, in the society that we live in, we have a lot of attitude that, you read a book and do what the book says, or you have one teacher and you do exactly what they say, and that's the right way. We have an obsession sometimes with the right way. But in a lot of different things, especially in the arts, including the psychic and magical arts, there isn't necessarily a right way. There are a variety of ways. And being also a visual artist, I can tell you that in terms of doing visual arts, there is not one right way. There are things you want to learn in the practice of finding your right way. But the way that you express your visual style may not be what everyone else does. And there's nothing wrong with that. And often, if you're a successful visual artist, it may be precisely because you're so different from what everyone else does. When I was young, one of the most celebrated visual artists was Grandma Moses. She was a very elderly woman who first started doing artwork for sale, I think, in her 90s. And she did what was called primitive artwork. It was very um, simple in its way, but very beautiful, very well balanced. The colors were very well chosen. Um, and this was something that just, I believe, came to her naturally. And she had spent her life doing other things. But when she finally came to the point that she had her own time, she started painting, and people loved it. And it looked unlike anything else that had been popular before. Um, that's an example of how we're all very different. Some of these psychic readers I have known or heard about in my lifetime did their work in ways that were very unlike anyone else. I've sometimes spoken about the doll lady. This was a reader who used to work at the J&M fairs in the Chicago area, and she had a table full of dolls. Um, they were kind of like the little sets of international dolls that used to be very popular back in the 60s and 70s. And her way of reading was she would ask a client to choose 7 of these dolls according to whatever caught their attention and in the order that they caught their attention. And then, because every doll had a meaning to her, she would read them for the person. And every number of that 7 had a meaning for her. And she apparently did very popular and very accurate readings in this manner, which I have never heard of another person doing. It doesn't mean there isn't anyone doing it, but I've never heard of another person doing it. Um, Another person with a very unique way of reading is Terry Milton, the Stone Lady. And she has a large um, table full of different stones. And you would choose a number of stones for your reading, and she would interpret for you um, the meaning of those stones. We have a number of videos from her at Magic TV, if you want to go and look for them, that talk about her understanding of stones and her method of reading. Very fascinating. Another way that this really is a very individual art. Marlena the Rock Lady, who was part of the team that ran the J&M fairs, also read stones differently. And I've known a number of people who read bones. The first person I ever knew who read the bones was Robin Lochurko, but I've met many since. And reading the bones is an African reading technique that is now used around the world. I believe it's traditional to the Sangomas of southern Africa. And when I was in Africa the last time, I had my bones read by a couple of different Sangomas and did an interview with Dr. Malikwa, who was a prominent Sangoma practitioner and teacher, and that also is on Magic TV. But when you read the bones, you have a collection of different artifacts that you have gathered that all have different meanings for you. And usually you put them in a bag. Some people will put them in a box. And the person being read for will choose usually a certain number of them. And again, you read them according to their individual meanings. Fascinating reading technique. So when we talk about the psychic arts, the potential variations are endless. And it's very important not to take a hidebound attitude toward them, to realize that this is very much a field with great differentiation, great individuality, and many different possibilities. And, I was reading tarot cards earlier. I was reading from the Hoi Polloi deck, and I guess I'll pull one out. Here's the Chariot. If you look at the Chariot and you're familiar with tarot decks, you'll see that this is closely based on the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. But tarot decks come in all kinds of different forms. Some use very different symbolism. And a lot of people think that the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is a very traditional tarot deck when it's nothing of the sort. The Rider-Waite-Smith deck is a little over 100 years old and was absolutely revolutionary when it came out. It drastically changed certain aspects of tarot reading for the people who use it and subscribe to its views. It was a huge step forward. Some might say sideways and forward in how tarot was interacted with. I think most people today have no idea just how revolutionary it was. And it is an example of why we don't just stand still. If you look at tarot decks before the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, many of the things people look at in tarot today are not there. Many of the associations people make with tarot today, such as, for example, with astrology and so forth, were not part of traditional tarot at all. Not in the same way, certainly. They go back to that period. And that was a period of great expansion and movement forward. I think these are wonderful things. And I'm very grateful they didn't feel constrained to stick only with what others had done previously. And I recommend that you don't either. So with that, I see we're coming toward the end of our hour. I want to take a moment and reference the Witchy Awards. And you can see information for the Witchy Awards going across the bottom of my screen. And you can find the Witchy Awards at modernwitch.com/Witchcraft and Occult Media Awards. And there you will find all sorts of different subjects with all sorts of different nominees for Witchy Awards in all kinds of different aspects of the metaphysical community. And I'd like to encourage you, if you haven't already, to go and vote for the people that you think deserve recognition for what they do. And I've spoken before about why this is important. It shows creators that their work is valued. It also helps them to see that their work is relevant. So I hope that you will go there and choose the people that you like and vote for them. And of course, I certainly would not be offended if I was one of those people you chose, because which is to say we, at Magic TV and Pagan World TV, are up for the award for Best Vidcast/Vlog. If you like the things that we do here at Pagan World TV and Magic TV, I hope that you'll consider voting for us. If you like Midday with Rev Don or Tarot Thursday or any of the many other shows we do, consider going and voting for us. And also, you will find under Best Video of the Year, you will find the nomination for Journey to the Parliament, a film that comes from us and is basically a documentary of the experiences of pagans dealing with the Parliament of the World's Religions over the last 30 years. It's a fascinating video. I highly recommend it to you. With that, I see that we've come to the end of our half hour. I want to thank you for joining me. Tomorrow is going to be a best of, so I will see you again on Monday. And now let us close with our prayer as we always do. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to maintain our connection to our higher self, to the powers of our soul. Help us to bring these through in life actively through magic, passively through psychism, and to stay connected always, and to receive the guidance of Spirit. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you, and knowing you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. I love you all. I love spending this time with you, and may you be blessed now and always.